The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hey, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. Thank you for being here today. We're here every day at 3 p.m. so you can kind of learn about art, stay upbeat, and keep your head in the game during these turbulent times. We have a great video for you today. It's called Color Magic for Stronger Paintings, and it's the great Suzie Baker. Enjoy.
I'm Suzie Baker. I'm a representational fine art oil painter. I've been plein air painting since I was a teenager, which is some years ago now. And in about 2010, I learned that the plein air movement was happening in the United States, and I remember thinking, how do I get involved in this? Today in this video, we're going to talk about color theory and how it relates to what you're painting and what you're observing outside. So light and color reacts in a real predictable way, and when we learn those things we can make some decisions, and it can inform how we mix color, how shadows work, how different light sources affect those shadows and how we view those shadows. And when we learn those things we can make decisions about how we choose color, how we choose to push or hold back our color based on what we know. So it's sort of some fundamental 101 things related to color theory and how it can be added to our artistic toolbox and help us make good decisions when we're outdoors painting. So I hope by the end of this video you're going to be able to really see the world differently. You're going to be walking around outside with your spouses and significant others, and you're going to say, what color is that shadow? And when they say gray, you'll say wrong, and you'll have some reasons of why that shadow actually has some color to it. Okay, so before we get started, I'd love to set the stage for you, because I'd like for us all to think about ourselves as lifelong learners. In the book Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell explains the concept of the 10,000 hour rule, and that is that sustained practice is what separates those from that have mastery from those that are merely enthusiasts. So whether that was referring to cellists or to, I think he even talks about thieves or criminals, those that are really, really good at what they do, they have sustained practice. They put in their 10,000 hours. So if you're feeling frustrated and you feel like every canvas you just want to frisbee across the lawn, that's normal. And we get our mastery from those mistakes. Okay, I'd love to share a few quotes with you too. Learn technique, have full command to the extent of not being conscious of how it's done. When craftsmanship has been developed, you are free to create. Technique will give way to expression. Sergei Bongard. And then this great line from the poem Anthem by Leonard Cohen, and that is, ring the bell that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. It's a perfect quote for what we're about to do, because we're going to be learning about light and how to let light into our painting. Okay, so speaking of being a lifelong student, here is a picture of me in 1991 when I was a good deal younger than I am right now. It's 20 plus years ago. And this is me out with my box. This is my grandmother's box. I'm sitting in Piazza Navona. And it was a 5-week student study program. I did 15 paintings in 5 weeks. I thought I was fabulously productive, which is kind of humorous to me now, knowing that sometimes in the course of 4 or 5 days we can get 15 paintings done. Okay, and so here are some paintings that I did in 1991. And I think these paintings are competent. They're things that I hope that the owners are still very happy with. But, you know, my sensibilities about edge work and subtlety are lacking a little bit in these paintings. So that idea, again, of being a lifelong learner and allowing yourself to have a voice and expression, but to constantly be adding things to that, to your backpack of knowledge, to your toolkit that you can pull out. Okay, so let's talk about some ways that you can incorporate painting into your daily life. My studio is in my home. I know what it's like to get distracted by munching on things from your refrigerator or doing your laundry. And so one of the things that I do on a regular basis is I sort of throw hurdles in my path. That's how I think about it. So I want to show you some ideas or give you some thoughts about how you can be regularly painting outdoors or in general on a more regular basis. On family vacations where I'm not going to be sitting down and being in one place for a long time, I have sort of a watercolor kit. And because it's much more portable, the cleanup is much easier, it's much smaller. I also have a little moleskin sketchbook that stays in my purse, and that can come out no matter where I am. Sketching and drawing. Drawing is a muscle that you ought to continually work out because it is foundational to your painting. Develop a group of friends that are like-minded and paint around your home. Get out and paint with friends. These couple paintings I did recently with a group of fellow artists in Boulder, Colorado. I had a very small, simple setup that fit into a tote bag, and it was 3 colors in white. The primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, and white. So it doesn't have to be a big rigmarole. I sat down, I had my 3 colors on a palette and a little brown piece of treated paper that I could paint on, and came up with some simple little solutions. Okay, plan trips with other painters. My advice here is make sure you like the people that you're traveling with and make sure they're all artists, because if they're not artists, then they're going to want to have long lunches, they're going to want to sleep in and have big breakfast, and you just want to get your stuff, get out and paint. And so traveling with just other artists where you can share expenses, share the room, share the rental car. These are some paintings that I did on a trip to Paris with some friends. You know, we had our day where we toured and saw the Louvre and the Orsay, but we also painted on a regular basis. These are great ways to sort of get out and not be hampered by the dailiness of life. You're there just to paint. Okay, hiking trips with other artists. Let me point out here that safety first. Make sure you have some sort of satellite communicator. These are things that we wish we had one time and we definitely used a few other times. Whether you're painting in a remote area where you don't have cell phone service or on the side of the road, always think about your safety. And that includes sunscreen. Artist in residence programs. They're all over the United States. You can Google these. The National Park hosts them. I recently did one in Yellowstone, and the access that you have to our national parks, to beautiful areas, to being again away from the dailiness of life, from your email, from Netflix, that this hurdle that you throw in your path, where that is what you're there for. You're there to paint and to expand your skills and to get a lot of work done. Workshops and conventions. I mean, we know there's a really huge convention, the Plein Air Convention and Expo, that happens on an annual basis. There is nothing like sort of getting out of your routine and being around a bunch of like-minded people. You know, in general, I find that plein air painters are a group of happy people. We are doing what we love, we're getting our vitamin D. There is something that is at our root that now we're with a group of people that is at their root and their core too. And there's this commonality, this sort of brotherly love that happens in an environment like that, where you are spurred on and motivated and getting out every day and painting. Workshops are a great way to do this. I often joke with people that take my workshops that they're just paying me to force them to paint for a week, because just the act of getting out and painting means that you are going to be better at the end of the week than you were at the beginning. Even if you didn't come up with a piece that you feel like is frameable, you were whacking your brushes against some problems, and hopefully with good teachers you're having some breakthroughs, you're having some aha moments. And getting out of that isolation, you kind of have to paint. I think the best students are the ones that show up and they have been whacking their brushes against these problems. Their canvas is too absorbent, their paint is too thin, their brushes were too stiff. And, there's something about the tactile nature of feeling the mistakes, so that when you're given the answer, you understand and you can internalize it so much more. So if you're signed up for a workshop, if you're signed up for a convention, give yourself an assignment where you're getting out and painting a lot, so that when you hear the answer, it allows for that light bulb moment to hit you. There are things that we take for granted as artists that we've sort of put in our backpack, in our toolkit, and we're acting on. But when I started teaching, I needed to be able to put that in a voice, so that this thing that I was sort of taking for granted was something that I could then deliver to students and they could pick up and chew on too. Okay, so here are some of those basics. All right, so the elements of color, let's break it into three things that are illustrated by this triangle here, and that is value, hue, and intensity. Now, hue, often I will talk about temperature and as it relates to hue, or the relative color of that object or that color that you're trying to mix. So you'll hear me sort of exchange those, especially when I'm referring to the temperature of the light source. First on our list of elements of color is value. And when you talk about painting in general, you get told about the importance of squint. And there's a number of reasons why squinting is important, and it's not just to give us lovely little crow's feet in the corner of our eyes. But value and judging value, the squint comes in very handy. Okay, so if you will squint at your computer screen or your television screen right now, squint down low, and what you're going to see is a box that moves from the painting into this 20% value of gray on the value scale below. And at a squint, we can see very strong margins of this interior color box to the exterior value box. But while you're still squinting, you're going to see this box move to the right a few steps. And at a deep squint, the margins of the interior box to the exterior box disappears entirely. So what that tells us is that the value of the interior and the exterior box are exactly the same. So it's at about a 50% on the gray scale. When we open our eyes, we can see that the color from the painting is a little cooler, a little bluer than the 50% black of the gray scale. But at a squint, we know that the value is the same because it disappears. The other great use of squinting is that it takes away the detail so that we're not seeing leaves and twigs and branches, but we're seeing big masses of value and of color, and it helps us simplify the thing that we're seeing in front of us so that we can make better sense of it for our composition and our painting. All right, let's move to the next point on our triangle, and that is hue. So hue is the basic color of an object. Is it red? Is it blue? Is it yellow? And then there's more to just that, because within red, a red could be a warmer, hotter yellow. It could be a warmer, more teal or cerulean blue. It could be a cooler yellow, like a lemon yellow, as opposed to the sunflower orangey yellow of the exterior box. Take this painting, for instance, High and Dry. The hulls of this boat the red boat. On the shadow side, that red is bluer and cooler. The hull, the major portion of the hull that is handled in a very drippy wash, transparent fashion, is warmer than the shadow side, but not as warm or as yellow as the fin of the hull there below. The green hull on the left in the shadow is bluer and cooler than the green hull in the sun. Let's move on to the third spoke on our triangle of breaking down and understanding color with intensity. Okay, so intensity is how rich or pure or jewel tone a color is versus how gray or muted that color is. Let's take this painting, for instance, from Crystal Cove, right outside of Laguna Beach. There's a lot of intense colors in this, but there's also some gray and muted colors. Just the color green in this painting, for instance. The two color blocks on the left are more intense, saturated colors than the two relatively gray greens on the right, yet you would still call all of these color blocks or colors green. All right, so now let's stop and do an assignment. What I would love for you to do is pause your video, get a 9x12 or an 8x10 canvas, and let's go outside. Okay, so we're all set up outside now here at the studio in Austin. And for this assignment, it doesn't have to be a beautiful scene. I just want you to step outside because what we're going to be doing is investigating color and mixing color until it's exactly what we see with our eye. All right, so I've got my scene in front of me. It's sunlit. And I'm going to choose from this scene 3 lights, 3 midtones, and 3 darks. And I'm going to mix those, or we're going to try to mix those together until they're really optically correct, using our triangle that we just learned about, where we're asking ourselves, is the value right, is the hue right, and is the intensity right? Okay, so let's get started with our lights. Again though, let's talk about our board setup for a minute. So this is an 8x10 canvas. Across it I've got 9 1-inch squares with a little optional drawn out of 4 squares for a gray day, which we don't have today. And then as a reminder, I've drawn my triangle and labeled it with value, hue, and intensity. Okay, so I think the first thing that I'm going to paint in my lights is this beautiful blue sky. And I'm going to paint the blue sky right above the tree line. Like if you look up, you can see that the sky is darker blue above our head, and then as we get close to the skyline or the tree line, it is lighter and warmer or yellower in color. So I want to get that for my first light, that color right there. All right, so what am I telling myself in my head is that the view or the hue is blue, and so it's a light blue. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to clean off this quinacridone from my palette first. Okay, and I'm going to reach for ultramarine blue, which is the only blue that we have squeezed out, and white. Okay, so when I look at this, I think I'm in the right neighborhood. I'm approaching the right neighborhood, and we're going to sneak up on the right color, meaning I don't want to add too much color, too much white or too much yellow. I want to sort of do it in small little sneaky doses. Okay, so I look at this color and I think 2 things. It's too saturated, it's too dark in value. So I'm going to add some more white. Okay, so value-wise, I think I'm much better. But I also observe the color to be warmer and yellower than what I have here on my panel. So I'm going to go grab a very small amount of yellow and mix that into my mixture. Also, I'm using a flat rosemary synthetic brush. It's kind of the perfect thing for doing color squares because I can load it up with paint and then I can come and put it right on my canvas. All right, so let's test this color on the canvas. And right away I can see that that looks way too dark to me. it can change, it can look a lot lighter here because of the amount of sun that it's receiving or light that it's receiving, even though we're in the shade. So to me, I'm judging that too dark, so I'm going to go into my white and lighten it in value. And I think I'll leave a little bit of that blue, so I'm working out of my mother pile, because right away I can see how quickly I've shifted from the value of this blue to the value of this blue. Okay, let me test it again. And that's looking a lot better to me. So I'm going to pause here and put my umbrella up, because even though we're in the dappled shade of the tree, it is dappled. And so some places my canvas is receiving light, some place shade. And the reason that we use umbrellas, in addition to saving our own skin, is primarily actually to make sure that we're painting in the shade. When you paint in direct sunlight, you tend to paint too dark. So not every artist is like this. I know my friend Colin Page can paint in direct sunlight and come up with beautiful controlled colors. I know about myself that I tend to paint too dark anyway, so then if I'm painting in direct sunlight, it makes matters even worse. So we're going to set up our umbrella and solve those problems. Whoops. Let me just say here too, really important thing about umbrellas is never, ever, ever walk away from a standing easel with your umbrella up. Take my word, fool me 10 times. When you do that, the chances, Murphy's law of gust of wind, is that it's going to come as soon as you step away from your canvas and take the whole kit and caboodle right over with you, with it. So, I've learned things the hard way. All right, now we have our umbrella up. We can see our colors a little bit better. And I was trying to mix this light blue of the sky right above the tree line. Okay, so I think value-wise, I'm in the right ballpark. Now, hue-wise, because I've added so much white, I've cooled down my mixture, my blue mixture. So I'm going to add just a little bit more yellow in order to get to that color right there. So I'm adding more of the hue of yellow, which is going to warm it a little bit, which is what my eye observes. When we're doing this in my workshop, oftentimes we'll draw on our canvas enough space to do a little painting of the scene. But what I tell the students, and what I'm telling you now, is that don't rush this process. Wait, and if all you get to do is mix the exact right color of what you're observing with your eye, then you've had a very successful day. All right, so there's our blue. Okay, let me pick another color in my lights. So I see some really bright yellow, green grasses in the sunshine, and I think I'm going to mix sort of I'm going to squint down and mix the average of the color that I'm seeing there in the grasses in the sun. All right, so I have a whole lot of blue and white on my brush. So it would be a mistake to do this and then try to start mixing that. You know, actually I say that, but it is pretty light and it is green. So for grins, let's go back into our mother pile here and then just start increasing the yellow hue of this and see if we can get there. Now, if I were trying to go right into my darks, it would be a mistake to leave so much white or light color in my brush. Okay, so I've mixed a green. I think the value is probably pretty close because I observe the value of the grass and the value of the sky to be very similar. And I can see, because I'm working here in mother pools and I'm squinting down, that my value hasn't shifted a whole lot. But I also think that this is a little too green to what I'm seeing. So because there's so much blue in my brush, I'm going to have to add a lot more paint to get that off of green. All right, so I'm going to go over into my yellow ochre, and I'm going to put a lot of it in there so I can really shift my color fast. All right, so now I've shifted my hue into a much more yellow color, but I've also shifted my value a lot. Do you see that? If you squint down at that, you can see a great variation. So now I have to, my hue is sort of bounced in closer to what I'm seeing, but my value is way off. All right, so I'm going to go over to my white, and I'm going to lighten my value again. So now I have a nice neutral yellow that's looking pretty good on my palette, but let's see what it looks like on my canvas. I think that's pretty good. I think that's matching pretty accurately what I'm seeing with my eye, so I'm going to commit to that. So when you're doing this exercise, it should be primarily paint. Not a lot of thin Gamma-Sol, not a lot of medium, because what you want to see is really a good solid color of your paint. Okay, so another thing about this, this exercise is let your colors touch, particularly if you're wanting to keep your values very similar. Don't let there be little white spaces in between. So not only are there grasses in the light, but there's also, wheat-looking dried grasses in the light, but there's also some sort of very unsaturated green grass in the light as well. So I'm going to come forward and look at this little patch of green grass and mix that color. So I'm going to go right back into this same little mother pool that I've got here, and I still have some of my blue reserved from my first mixture. So let's just add some lemon yellow to that and see where that gets me. So right away I'm shifting within a really close value pattern over away from this sort of wheat yellow to a green, but the green that I observe here has more blue hue to it. So I'm going to go to my ultramarine blue. Now because this ultramarine blue is so dark, I know it's also going to shift my value to a darker color. All right, so my hue is getting much closer to what I'm observing. I think it could be a little bit more blue. Okay, let's test that up here. Okay, I think it could be a little lighter. So I'm going to mix both yellow and white into my green mixture. And that did lighten it some and kept it in the relative hue. So notice the intensity or the saturation of these colors are not very saturated. They're pretty muted. Okay, so now I have my three lights. I'm ready to move on to my midtones. And since I'm working from light to dark, I've got a lot of white and light color in my brush. So now would be the great time to leave my piles alone, but clean my brush a lot. Okay, so let's get started on our midtones. I've got a clean brush and I've got a clean area of my palette to deal with. All right, so I'm going to start, I think, by mixing some of the shadow color of the green tree up there. So it's green. I'm going to go with the obvious of ultramarine blue and Indian yellow. And what I see up there is definitely less saturated than the color that I've mixed here. So to kill some of the intensity of this particular color, I'm going to go and again sneak up on making it less intense by adding a little bit of transparent red oxide, which what it's doing is introducing a little bit of the complement of green into this color. And what you can see is that it mutes it immediately. So the intensity of that color is much lower than where I started. Okay, so let me put a little bit up there and see where I am. All right, so I think I'm in the right hue family. I think I'm in the right intensity. I think I'm a little too dark. So what I have to do is get this to lighten up some, but try to keep those other things under control. So I know if I add white to this, then it's going to cool it down some. So I think I'm going to add a little white, but also a little yellow at the same time. And then, again, sneaking up on it, a little bit of my transparent red oxide. And let me see where this got me. All right, so I'm pretty happy with that color. I think I've matched the mid-tone of the sort of a green, I guess that's a low-growing oak, in shadow. Okay, so now if I've painted the shadow color right out of that, I want to lighten it, because as it turns from shadow into light, now I want to get that color. So I can go right into the color that I've mixed. And since it's the same light and structure, what I think I can do is just lighten it with a little bit of Indian yellow and white. So let's see if that works. And again, since I'm mixing in a mother pool, I can see right here what's happening to it. So already I know that I've increased the value quite a bit. And then a little bit of transparent red oxide. And let's test it. Okay, well, the sun just went behind the cloud, but I think that it is a little more yellow than what I've painted. So I'm going to add some more Indian yellow. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, now since all of these greens are so low in intensity, I wanted to move over to this very bright chartreusey green of the tree off to my left. So I'm going to clean my brush, and since I'm going for intensity, I'm going to go with a lot of the Indian yellow and a little bit of blue for starting. My Indian yellow is an old tube, so it's a little sticky. So I'm adding a little bit, just a tiny bit, of the solvent-free gel to sort of increase the flow and slipperiness of the paint. Okay, so it's a pretty bright color in its intensity. It's a very chartreuse, and it's a pretty pure color too, so I don't know that I need to cut it back very much with its complement. So let's test it. Ooh, I think I nailed it. Okay, I'm going to put that in place. All right. Now let's move to our darks. But first, let's clean our brush. Really, really important to clean your brush at this point because, again, we have a lot of light in our brush. I either need to switch my brush or clean this one really good. All right, so what I'm going to choose from my darks is the same sort of oak that I did the leaves and the light and as they turn into shadow. I've observed some places where it's even darker still, and I think I'm going to go for that. And then I'm in the deepest shadow of the wood. It feels redder because the earth and the trunks are sort of contributing, but it's a very deep dark. So I'm going to do that. And then I've got to decide on my third dark. Since I'm looking at that oak tree in deep shadow, I think instead of using Indian yellow, instead of lemon yellow, I'll go for my yellow ochre. Wow, that yellow ochre did a really nice thing in that since it's not a very intense color itself, and because it has a lot of red in it, then immediately it took my green to less saturated than when I say mix this color for the first time. I think I'll go with a little Indian yellow to lighten it up slightly. And that looks pretty good to me. So that would be the green in the deepest shadow. So I observe them at a squint being very close to my dark green in shadow in value. So I think what I'm going to do is start with a purple with some alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue. Let me mix it right next to that dark green. Okay, so that's a little too dark, and I'm going to lighten it some, but with my yellow ochre. And that gets me to a pretty nice, deep purpley brown that I judge as the same value as that dark green. So let me test that. I think a little bit more yellow ochre. So yellow ochre and purple make kind of a nice complement too. So I know when I'm adding that, I'm lightening it some, but I'm also making it a little less intense. And they're such tiny little adjustments, because remember, we're sneaking up on our color. Okay. So now I have to pick a third dark, and I see a row of a stone wall with some really big boulders, and there's some shadow in those boulders. So I'm going to pick one of the shadows and mix that color. And I observe it not being quite as dark as these two colors here, and grayer than those two colors. So what would happen if I mix these two colors together? Add some white, because I know it's lighter. That gets me to a nice green-gray. But I observe it being a little more yellow in hue. Oop, that was a big jump. I didn't sneak up on that. I think I went too yellow. So let me add a little purple with some blue and red. Ugh. Now I jumped too quickly to the red. Okay, back to my yellow. So the longer you stare at a color, the less saturated, the grayer it gets, the harder it is to figure out. And our eyes don't work like that. Like, we don't stare at one thing for a long, long time. We bounce around from thing to thing, and the cones in our eyes have a chance to relax and adjust and change what they're looking at. So if you're having a difficult time labeling the hue or something about a color, then look away and then look back to it, and you'll get an impression that will help you mix that color. So I've got a nice neutral, very unsaturated, dark in value gray. Let's try just adding a tiny bit of yellow, the lemon yellow. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to commit and do my last dark square. So if you saw this through to the end, now it's your turn to get outside and do the same thing. Okay, so now let's move on to a little color theory. You may have heard it said before that if it's a warm light, it's a cool shadow. If it's a cool light, it's a warm shadow. But is that true? And when it's true, why is it true? And when it's not true, why is it not true? On your screen, you're going to see some color blocks. The interior box on the right appears more saturated, more blue. If you look at it, you can even, your eyes will even vibrate between the color of the warm sort of cornflower yellow hue and the bluer gray color on the inside. The reason that your eye vibrates between these two colors is the way our cones in our eyes interpret color. And because these two colors are approaching complements, we get that sort of vibration going on. The inside box is actually the same color as on the right as it is on the left, but it appears more saturated because what it's surrounded by of that warm yellow. Okay, so one of the reasons why when you have a warm light source, your shadows might appear bluer and cooler is this effect right here, the way that our eye interprets color. So a warmer color is going to interpret a relatively cool color as being cooler. All right, let's look at this more subtle example, and we still see some of this happening. The interior box on the right appears bluer and cooler, even though it is the same as the box that's surrounded by the gray on the left. And I'm showing you these two boxes because these colors are sampled from the photographs that you're about to see. So these two cups I photographed at different times of day. So there's the 4:30 p.m. when the sun is relatively overhead and a cooler light, as opposed to the 6:30 p.m. as the sun begins to set in the sky and the sun rays begin to warm. Okay, so let's stop for a second. There's a reason why sun rays in the morning and in the evening are warmer, and that is because when you have the curvature of your Earth and the sun is directly overhead, the Rayleigh scattering effect produces a bluer, cooler light relative to when the sun begins to set and is oblique on the horizon. It's got more atmosphere that it has to cut through, and the longer rays of the red is what gets through to our eye. Okay, so now back to our cups. We have the warmer sunset or approaching sunset cup on the right, and the cup is definitely warmer in hue, yellower in hue. The shadow color is demonstrated in these two squares. The interior and exterior square in this color block represents both of the shadows, regardless of the color of the light. Okay, so why is that? Why, if the color of our light changes, does our shadow color not change? And the reason is that there's a secondary light source. So we have a primary light source of the sun. The secondary light source is the sky. So the blue sky is contributing its color to our shadow color, and that is why that blue shadow remains consistent regardless of our light source. Okay, and since Monet did not want to paint a white cup on a white styrofoam plate, instead he painted a magpie on a fence. And here's a beautiful painting called The Magpie, painted in 1869 by Claude Monet. And the colors are the same as our warm cup with the blue shadow. And he's done it to great effect. It's interesting that how in his snow he has even sort of melded these whites of this cool white and this warm white playing off one another. Now let's illustrate this phenomenon with this funny picture of myself and the lovely and talented Shelby Keefe. Okay, in this photograph, we have some ridiculous little outfits that were scavenged together from a resale shop in San Angelo, Texas. The opening in Plein Air, Texas happened to be on Halloween night, and we thought it would be fun to not wear our usual safe outfits and put on something that was a little more artistic, let's say. So here we are in really late rays of a setting sun, and the whites in this painting of my dress and the door jamb are really not white at all. Like if you were going to paint that, you would reach for white, but add a good heaping helping of an Indian yellow, something to really warm it up. So look at the door jamb behind my head and the color of my dress, and it is very warm in hue, very yellow in hue. As opposed to the door jamb behind Shelby's head, which is very blue, and the shadow behind me, which is very blue, commingled with the warm color of the stone that that shadow is laid on top of. Look at the little stairs that are there by Shelby's knee, and all of the subtle variation of color that's happening in that, from the plane that is vertical to the setting sun versus the planes that are facing upward into the deepening blue of the night sky. There are some really little subtle hue and temperature shifts that are happening in those stairs that are just lovely. If an object is in the light, it is also a source of light. Take my shirt, for instance. My shirt is a bright pink under a nice white light here in the studio, and it is contributing some of its color to my chin. So if you have a model and you're painting the model, look for the things that are surrounding the model, because it's going to contribute its color into the shadow areas that you're dealing with. So let's look at it this way. If I hold this white piece of paper under my chin, the color changes dramatically. And then I pull it away, and there's that pink again. So if you have put your model in particularly a very reflective, let's say you have a bright satiny red scarf on your model, it's going to contribute a lot of its color into the model's neck and chin, and maybe even the underside of the nose. So knowing that that happens means that you can look for it. And that's whether it's in a still life, it's in your landscape, it's in your posed model. So the cutie is contributing some of its color into the shadow color, where the shadow color turns a more purple and orange in the margins, right underneath the base of that cutie. The whole shadow color sort of has a gradation of color shift that's happening. Look at the edge of the styrofoam plate and how much of that reflected light from the cutie is reflecting into the edge and the lip of the styrofoam plate. The same thing with the banana. But then as you get further and further away from the cutie and from the banana, we get less and less of the color of the object itself and more of just the blue from the sky. In this next photograph, we're going to sort of bring it all together in this super cleverly designed still life setup that I've created here. So this is Memorial Day. My family is out skiing and tubing, and I am setting up this fabulously interesting little still life. Okay, so I guess Claude Monet would not want to paint my user manual for my Nikon or the flyer from the Green Historic District, but I think it shows all the things that we're talking about of our primary light source, our secondary light source, and our tertiary light source. So take this cutie, for instance, and all the things that are happening in this greatly varied drop shadow that is right underneath this cutie. I mean, it goes from blue to purple to pink, and the reflected light in the core shadow of this cutie that's being caused by my folded bright pink hoodie. There's all sorts of things bouncing around this painting. The puzzle piece that is laying on the edge of the book, and how its shadow is sort of cascading through the edge of the book and hitting this bright turquoise table, and all the color changes that are happening in here. Interestingly, I think there's even a fourth light source that's happening with the somewhat translucent shirt or hoodie, where the interior of the fold of the hoodie is a deep orange red, because the hoodie itself is contributing its color into that deep shadow. And then as you come forward into the very lip and edge margin of the hoodie on that, on the edge of the fold, it gets bluer and then pinker. You may want to pause your video at this point and do a little more of a deep dive and think about how the primary light source of the sun, the secondary light source of the sky, and the tertiary light source of the bounced and reflected light are contributing to the shadow and the colors that you observe in this little setup that I've done. This accommodating seagull is standing on a red buoy, and so much of that warm red is bouncing from the buoy into his underneath, and we can see as his body and his breast sort of curves up towards the sky, the color of the shadow shifts from an orangey red into a cooler blue because it is tilting more towards and receiving more color from the blue sky. Look underneath his chin and the color shifts as it goes from the orangey, pinky red into purple, into blue there right above his beak. And we see this, this color theory coming into play in this very accommodating seagull. Now we're going to look at a painting by Claude Monet called End of Summer. It's one of his haystack paintings that he painted in 1891. Claude Monet may not have called it color theory, but he clearly understood it and used it to great effect. All right, so let's dive into this painting. Squint at your computer screen, and you can see that Monet takes the shadow shapes of these two haystacks. Instead of breaking value, he breaks hue. So when we squint down, then we can see that the whole shape of the shadow of the haystack on the right and the haystack on the left are one big shape, and they balance one another. When we open our eyes, we can see that there are very subtle and smart hue shifts that are happening from the top to the side to the drop shadow of the haystacks. Another thing about the two haystacks, in addition to the haystack on the left being smaller, it is also less saturated. So the color is grayer and the value is darker. So it's Monet telling us that the main squeeze is the haystack on the right and the secondary guy is the one on the left. Okay, go to that haystack on the right. The subtle hue shifts that Monet is showing us in the haystack on the right gives us a lot of information about what is composing this haystack. Like, I can assume that this is some sort of wheat and the top is lighter and warm and is receiving the sun on the left. So the left sunlit portion of the haystack is sort of the local color or the color of the wheat itself. And as that rotates and turns away from the sun and into the shadow, we get all of that blue from the blue sky. Okay, so now let's look at the barrel of the haystack. It is purpler, and there's some orange in there, as well as the cool of the sky. So that tells us that the shaft of the wheat is warmer and redder than the top head of the wheat. Then, as the shadow begins to spill across the grass, it is a greener blue shadow, and that is because the color of the grass itself is contributing its color to the shadow on the grass. So again, we squint down and we see one major shape that's making up that whole shadow shape, but we open our eyes and we see that the hue shifts from bluer to purpler to greener, all within the same value range. Okay, another beautiful thing I want to point out about this haystack is when the profile of the haystack turns the way the eave of a house might turn towards the ground, we see a warming. Okay, let's look at the painting. Okay, right here at that eave of a house lip, it warms slightly. Do you see the orange that he's given us? It's totally beautiful. This is something that you can look at when you are painting outdoors. We don't have these wonderful little pointy house-shaped hay bales anymore, but we do have houses and we do have eaves. And you will begin to notice that as the eave of a house turns towards the ground, there's a warming effect that happens when the light hits the ground, bounces up into the eaves, and warms that area. I taught a workshop out in Rockport, Texas, and when I was scoping out places for the class to go and paint, I saw this Catholic shrine. It's a white building, it's got some great overhangs, and it's got a lot of opportunities for a reflected light source. Unfortunately for the workshop, it was a very gray day when we were getting out and investigating color, but I returned to Rockport a few months ago for the Outdoor Painter Society and plein air paint out. And I was able to return to this place and paint what I had observed and all the exciting things that were happening with light, primary, secondary, and reflected light source. What I loved about the scene is that on the right side of the building that's receiving the light, the shadow under the eave is very green. And the reason that it's so green is that it's getting a lot of reflected light into the eave and into the shadow color from the green grass. So not only are we getting the blue from our secondary light source of the sky, but we're also getting green from the reflected light in the grass. There's also some really interesting things happening in that curved window where it goes from the blue shadow to a warm shadow at the top, or the zenith of the windowsill. And then you come around to the front of the building that is in complete shadow, and we have this sort of gravel or warm earth, no, I think it's just gravel, pathway, and it is shifting the color in the shadow of the front of the house from something that's yellower and warmer and being affected by the pathway into being affected by it less and less as it moves up towards that uppermost window when it's getting more of the blue of the sky. You can see in my painting how I interpreted those colors. Now, I think it's important to point out here that there's a real difference between what the eye can see and what the camera interprets. There's certainly times where you want to use photographs or you need to use photographs, but painting from life is so important because your eye interprets color so much better than what a camera can interpret. So my primary focus and the primary interest in this painting is the light effect that is happening on this white building. I often wait and choose my painting, or maybe a better way to say that is let a painting choose me, when an idea just sort of stops me in my tracks. There's an Edgar Payne quote that says, "A worthwhile idea entirely separate from the mechanics of painting should precede each picture in arrangement." I've heard Jill Carver call this the motif, or the idea. You know, what is that painting about? So often, a really good painting or a very successful painting is not necessarily about a house or a bowl of fruit or a particular model, but about the expression or about the idea that it communicates. So the idea that I was going for in this painting was this very thing that we're talking about, and that is light effect, how the light is affecting this beautiful white shrine in Rockport, Texas. So now back to the photographs of the scene itself. In these photographs, you can see that I chose to leave out the strong vertical light post that's directly in front of the church's facade. It didn't contribute to my main idea, but back to my painting, the light post behind it kind of did. You know, it serves as bringing the eye around the composition of the painting. As I began painting, some activity began to happen. This nun, who I later found out's name was Sister Lorraine, was moving in and out of composition. Some workers pulled over a piece of machinery and started adding the flashing to the sides and to the eaves of this painting. I assume that these are repairs that were happening on this shrine because 9 to 10 months earlier, Hurricane Harvey swept through the area, wrought so much destruction to this area. And, you know, here I'm sort of witnessing this point in time where a monument or a shrine that is important to the area is being repaired, and this area is sort of returning and coming back from the destruction that Harvey had wrought. Let me just pause here and make a statement or a note of something that I think is really important about plein air painting, and that in some ways we are little historians. We are recording times and places and events and locations that of things that have happened that in 10, 20, 50 years are going to look entirely different and may not be here. We are painting old houses and places and roads that will change. And I think that's one of the exciting things about this plein air movement, is that we are serving as adjunct historians. All right, so back to our pictures. Another reason why I want you to look at these pictures that I took as I am painting this is that my scene really changes entirely. The light shifts from the side of the building to entirely lighting the front of the building. And the reason why having that initial idea is so important and sticking to it is that you cannot chase your light around. If the idea was to show how the light and shadow changes, it needs to be told throughout from the very beginning of the painting to the very end of the painting. So in these photographs, you can see that my light changes entirely, so that by the end of the painting, it is fully lit on the front. It's a totally different painting. It would be about something entirely different. So I needed to hang on to that idea until the very end of the painting. Okay, before we move on to the painting side of this video, I want to touch on one more color theory concept, and that is atmospheric perspective. It's a really important thing to know, and when you know what it does, then you can push it a little bit in your painting, and that'll be something that I'm doing in the demo part of this video. All right, so let's look at a few pictures from a recent painting trip, a plein air event in Maui. Poor me, huh? Painting in Maui. All right, so here is a photograph taken with a real extreme example of atmospheric perspective. There's a very heavy fog over this, this beautiful groove of a mountain range. So here's what we know about atmospheric perspective. As things in the distance move further and further away from you, they get bluer in hue, lighter in value, and less distinct in their detail. So this is a really important technique and fund of knowledge that you can employ when you're out plein air painting. You can look for it and you'll see it more and more now that you know it. Okay, in this next series of paintings, you're going to see a few exceptions to that rule of atmospheric perspective. And again, we're going to go to the time of day when the light is very warm and it's contributing its warmth to the thing that it's throwing its light onto. Okay, so in this series of paintings, it's from a backpacking trip I did with the Granite Group, Paul Cratter and Bill Cohn, and a great group of artists. And we're getting up early and we're painting what we see on location. So this is in the Sierras. And in this series of paintings, the light is very fleeting. So let's look at the first painting. In this first painting, it was from 6:10 a.m. to 6:30 a.m. And that light doesn't last long. The bright orange rays of the morning sun have just broken over the box canyon that we're in, and it's casting its warm ray onto that. So this is a small little 6x8 painting that you can tell is a very quick little color study. The next painting is from 7 to 8 a.m. and I did it 3 mornings in a row, sort of getting up and catching this bit of light as it spilled even further into and onto the same mountains. You can see in that top left this little wedge of formation in the mountain, and it appears in all 3 of these paintings. Okay, so this midday painting is arguably a little less interesting than the golden hours of the morning and the evening light. There are some cast shadows, but our color is flatter. But it's interesting series of paintings because it shows you how the same scene changes throughout the day depending on the different light. And it also illustrates, especially in that first painting, that yes, that mountain is further away from me, but the atmospheric perspective of it being cooler and less saturated or less distinct kind of goes away because the light has changed. And finally, this last painting is from Telluride Plein Air, and it sort of shows us the best of both worlds. We're getting that atmospheric perspective of the blue mountain, but we're also getting this, it's called alpenglow, where the sun is actually setting behind me and casting its super warm rays as it recedes up the mountain and then disappears entirely. So It's fun to sort of catch these times. It's challenging to catch these times because they're very fleeting. This particular painting I started one evening. I got it back to my room and realized that I felt like I made the whole mountain area about 2 shades too dark in value, and it wasn't communicating that idea that I had of catching that light and that moment of alpenglow. So I scraped it out. I went back the next day and I hurried and got that sort of light effect. Fortunately, Telluride and the light was being very accommodating 2 nights in a row. So just as an aside, that's a way that you might approach those sort of fleeting times of day where it's the most beautiful, but it's also one of the most challenging to catch in plein air. But it's also the thing that's very hard to photograph and get accurate in your photographs. So you need your eyeballs engaged, and you need to be standing there and catching that light. Hi everyone, welcome to my demo. We're going to start painting today, but before we do that, we're going to look at some photos that I chose to illustrate this color theory and outdoor painting. All right, let's look at some of the photos. Okay, here are a couple of photos of a house that I saw in Leapers Fork, Tennessee. And from the facade or the front, the color of the shadow is this nice gray blue. And as we get up towards the eaves, it warms up because of that reflected light that we talked about. All right, so coming around the house some and up to the corner where the shadow side receives a lot of reflected light. So there's a lot of green in that shadow, and then you can see that also getting slightly lighter and greener up towards the eave. The other thing that I really liked about this house is this picket fence that runs all around it. And so on the shadow side of that picket fence, now we see the white of that picket fence is taking on a pink hue. And that is because of that gravel driveway that runs right next to it. All right, so those are some really interesting things that were making me interested in painting this house. And the view that I've chosen is this total side view. So we get the fence, we get some of the front facade of the house receiving the direct sunlight with the cool blue shadows. And then the side of the house that's in complete shadow, but that shadow color has turned very green in hue because of the bright green reflected grass. And I love how that the green of the grass is cutting through and giving me a really nice rhythm in that picket fence. And the picket fence that we know is like a Sherwin-Williams white is taking on that super pink hue because of that gravel path. And then as we come forward, we have this great little shadow that we can step over and into the painting. And then that shadow stretches across the green grass in the foreground and turns very purple as it hits that pinky orange gravel. And we know that happens because of the blue of our secondary light source, which is the sky, and that pinky orange of the gravel, and that gives us that purple. There's also some really nice things happening on the right. Entering the painting, we have this siding of the house closest to us, and it's pointing us into our little main squeeze there of that little cottage with its tin roof. I like the idea of this sort of road curving in, and then the opportunity for some of the atmospheric perspective happening in those trees in the background. I also like the telephone pole that is giving me a really nice stopper on the far left. So those are things that I'm going to take into account as I work up my composition for this particular painting. Okay, let's get started and go to my palette and talk about the paint and the brushes that I'm going to use. All right, let's start on the right and work our way over to the left here. So I have a clean can of Gamsol. I'm going to be using a solvent-free gel, and what I like about this is there's no toxicity, but it's a nice heavy-bodied gel that when I want to increase the viscosity of my paint, I can dip into that a little bit and increase my flow. So it's titanium white and Gamblin. One of my really favorite colors of Indian yellow. This one is a red shade by Michael Harding. Indian yellow, I think of it as almost like liquid sunshine. You mix a little bit of that with white and it just brightens up super fast. It also is a transparent color, so that means I can mix this particular yellow with other colors and it's not going to change the value, but it will change the hue. Then I have a much cooler yellow, or my yellow ochre. And then this is a Michael Harding King's Blue Deep. So what I really like about this color is it's not the fact that it's a totally unique color, because I could probably mix it with some ultramarine blue or cobalt blue and white, but it's a really great convenience color for plein air painting because it makes such a nice sky blue. So again, then I have a cobalt blue, let's get this in the right order, and an ultramarine blue, which hue-wise are not that different than each other, but for me it's nice to have a variety of values in my blue because it helps me get to my color faster. Cobalt blue is also an opaque color, whereas ultramarine blue is more transparent. So if I'm mixing some darks that I want to remain transparent, I'm likely to reach for my ultramarine blue as opposed to the cobalt. Okay, a unique color on my palette today is quinacridone red. And the reason that it's there is because the pinks that I can get with quinacridone are different than what I can get with alizarin. Alizarin permanent is a cool red. It's got a lot of blue in it and even some yellow. But the quinacridone red gives me a nice fuchsia or rose color that I just can't get out of alizarin permanent. And then finally is transparent earth red. This color is my go-to color, and for toning, for that sort of earth color. It used to be on my palette as burnt sienna, but this has replaced that, mainly because of its transparent qualities. Okay, and so some of the brushes I'm using, I've got a big variety, mostly rosemary brushes. Actually today, all rosemary brushes. From filberts that are natural bristled to synthetic bristles, to some more natural, soft, bristled brushes. I've also got a variety of other tools and implements that I'll be using throughout the painting. And when I pick up a brush and talk about it and use it, I'll talk a little bit about how I'm going to use that particular brush and in what situation and what it's good for. All right, let's get going on the painting. Okay, so with some Gamsol, and I think I'm going to tone a lot of this with transparent red oxide. And the reason is it goes on with a really, or transparent earth red is what Gambling calls it. It's called transparent red oxide in other brands, Rembrandt and whatnot. So the reason that this is such a nice tone is that beneath green, it's sort of a natural complement, and it gives the eye something really interesting to look at. I think simultaneously, though, I'm going to do a little bit of a dual tone. And since I've got this bright strip of green in the painting that I'm interested in, I'm going to put some bright yellow, a bright yellow green in there too, because I think that's going to serve my finished painting really well. It makes the things on top of it look better. All right, so in the area where that green is going to be, I'm going to scrub in this really bright green so that it's sort of living back there, and I'll be able to use some of that and may not even have to touch some of it. But then the rest of it, behind the green of the foliage and the blue of the sky, I think that this transparent red oxide is going to serve really well. So tones, they ought to be loose and not white, because white's not going to dry and set up, so that anything that you paint on top of it, if it's got some white in it, it's just going to bleed into the things that you're trying to put on top. And so good transparent washes is what you want to think about when you're putting a tone down. So now I'm just going to sort of wipe this down with my Viva paper towels. I wonder if artists can buy stock in Viva paper towels. We should. All right, so it's a pretty simple tone. So while this is setting up, I want to show you some other examples of successful or ways to think about toning your canvas. So setting the tone of a painting is like putting on Spanx before you put on your party dress. It makes everything on top of it look better. So this is a painting. This is a really fun painting by Jim Richards. He painted this at the Olmsted Plein Air in 2018, and the Spanx World headquarters right there in Buckhead. So I asked if I could use an image of his painting in this demo. Okay, so here is a tone, a little more of an elaborate tone that I did for a painting in the 2017 Easton Tillman Island plein air event. So in this particular one, I'm thinking about both the complementary color to the thing that's on top of it, or the color itself to give it more glow. And if you'll watch, you'll see the painting sort of materialize on top of it, and how I use the tone to either complement or build up the color that's beneath it. So the yellow house is the bride, and all the other houses are sort of the bridesmaids. So she really needed to stand forward the most. So she's brighter, she's more saturated, there's some hard edges around it. The bicyclist is heading to the house. The pink crepe myrtle tree is there in that corridor of thirds with her. And even the picket fence is sort of leading up into her. And so everything in that tone needed to contribute to this sort of main idea, or this motif that we talked about earlier. So let's go to another painting where I did a pretty elaborate tone, thinking about how it was going to contribute to the things that were coming on top of it. All right, so this tone, you may not even be able to tell where I'm going with this, but this is a whole lot of practically everything, every transparent dark color on my palette is coming into this tone. So there's some Prussian blue, there's some Viridian green, there's Indian yellow and raw sienna. There's some commingling of those colors of transparent red oxide and blue and sap green. And then here is what came on, or here is the scene that I'm looking at of this waterfall. So it was a very overcast and rainy day, and I'm trying to think, how can I infuse this painting with color and give it more interest instead of just a lot of gray? And then here is the painting and how it turned out. And you can see underneath the water, some of those transparent colors are infiltrating into the white and contributing to the color of the white. Sometimes I didn't cover them up at all. And I'm really pleased with how this painting came out, but it's also just another example of how laying the groundwork for a strong tone can make the things on top of it look better. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is some drawing. So this is a pretty elaborate drawing for me. Sometimes when there's not a lot of architecture involved and I feel really confident in the design that I have planned, I'll go right into the canvas with massing in my major shapes. In this situation, since there's some architecture involved and also literal perspective involved, I think I'm going to start with a pencil and give myself some markers so that it'll help me in the future not have to redraw. So when I cropped this photo for painting, I paid special attention that I wasn't going to put the peak of this roof at my midway point. I wanted it to be in this third corridor up here. So I wanted to avoid my halfway points, which would be here and here. So keeping things in my thirds is something that I'm thinking about. Okay, and I'm going to monkey with reality just a little bit here and scoot things over so that I can have this sort of road curving in here. Some nice dip down of the sky. Atmosphere, yeah. Okay. Okay, so when you're drawing with perspective, the items, the horizontal items that are at eye level are going to be the ones that are perfectly horizontal to the bottom of your picture plane. And then they're going to start rotating along that that perspective line from your visual eye point. So I'll just start indicating some of these lines, but I'll do a lot of that with my brush and less of it with my pencil here. Okay, I think I've got things placed in a way that is going to help me as I move forward to my mass in. Okay, so now let's start by massing in our major shapes. Okay, this is a nice big, what is this, a number 10 Rosemary Ultimate Filbert. You can see that because of use, it's already starting to change its shape some because of how I scrub at it on the canvas. But I kind of think of these filberts as the workhorses of my, my brush collection because I use them a lot for the massing in. Okay, so I'm gonna mix myself a nice pile of green. So when you have a color that's a little too saturated, a little too intense, then you can knock it back with a color that is either gray or approximate to its complement, and that mutes its voice some. When you're massing in is a really good time to use your squint. You know, you're not looking for little leaves or specific information, maybe not even highlights or things like that, especially in this big mass that is mainly in the shadow. So I do a lot of squinting at this point in my painting. Okay, so I mix colors in what I think of as mother pools so that I have a little bit of that color, but it's also informing and infiltrating the colors that I'm adding or building out of it. See if I can balance this one. Okay, so I have some distant trees here behind these houses, and I think I'm going to use some of what I know about atmospheric perspective, that things get lighter in value, cooler in temperature or in hue, and less distinct, and think about changing that color somewhat so that it recedes. Okay, so if I have a green here and I want it to be less saturated, more gray, then I can reach over into my reds or that transparent red oxide and neutralize it some. So that brought it a little gray. Oops, went too far too fast. Let's see if we can get back. Let's see where that is. I think it could be a little lighter. So when I squeeze out my paints too, I squeeze them out in sort of worms of paint instead of little round puddles, and that allows me to sort of dip into their margins, and then when I need some nice pure clean paint, I can pull into a clean area of it. So I think where I went wrong just then is there was a lot of Indian yellow already in this white, and it shifted it a lot faster than I had intended. Nearly every painter that I've taken a workshop from, I've watched them sort of mix a color of paint and then come back and adjust it and test it and then come back and adjust it until they get it right. You know, there's something, just some study that went into something called decision fatigue, and it's where when you've been making a series of decisions after decision after decision, the quality of your decision making goes down. And it just seems like that really applies to painting, because we're making hundreds of decisions, one right after another, after another, after another. And I think you know when you're suffering from decision fatigue, when all of a sudden any color that you mix is the absolute right one. If that's the case, it's probably time to put your brush down, go stretch, or look at what some of the other students in your workshop are doing. Give yourself a little mental break, and then come back and have some fresh eyes on your canvas, and you'll probably see things in a different way.
There is nothing quite as satisfying as when you make the last stroke on your painting, step back, and know that you've nailed it. You've created a work of art that is exactly what you envisioned. Each element in the painting, color harmony, the feel of light, all of it working together to create the right rhythm, leading your eyes along a natural path. You're about to discover how you can get to your aha faster. Mastering color and light is what makes a painting great. Get these techniques right, and you'll never shy away from painting anything again. In this new and exclusive workshop-style video, highly sought-after instructor and award-winning artist Suzie Baker shows you exactly what you need to know to create the most beautiful, realistic color and light in your paintings. By adding Suzie Baker's color magic to your resource library, you get to experience Suzie's easygoing and informative teaching style all to yourself. It's like having a one-on-one class with Suzie, and the best part? You get to do this on your own schedule and in your own home or studio.
Here are some things that I hope you get from this video. I've put a lot of thought into what are some of those basic fund of knowledge that I got in college and through years of painting and experience that I could sort of impart to you so that your next plein air experience is more rewarding. You can take some of this color knowledge and bring that into your sensibility and your work.
From the first minute of this value-packed video, you'll find out that color and light act in a very predictable way. How to mix just the right colors to get exactly what you want, and how different light sources affect shadows and color. By the time you watch the entire video, you'll be looking at the world so much differently than you do now. You'll be seeing the true colors of the world. Don't start another painting before you soak in the valuable tips and techniques that Suzie lays out for you in the Color Magic. Watch and you'll not only be inspired, you'll be making better paintings. Color Magic, available on both DVD and digital download. This is one video you do not want to miss out on. Order yours today.
Well, that is Suzie Baker, and it's called Color Magic for Stronger Paintings. If you get your color down, everything else comes together. You can learn more about that full-length video at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code for you in the comments section, and it's good for today only. Make sure you take advantage of it. Now let's get right to our interview with Suzie Baker.
So I would describe my style of painting as representational, meaning not abstract. I would describe it as somewhat impressionistic, though I've been known to, change the way I approach something based on what I feel like the scene or the model or the still life is dictating. But generally, I try to paint in a very loose, alla prima, spontaneous approach. I like to share a quote by Dolly Parton where she says, it costs a lot of money to look this cheap, but it takes a lot of planning to look spontaneous. And when I see that at work and other artists' work, I admire it a lot, where it looks like there's a lot of confidence and boldness and mastery in the stroke, and I strive for that. Don't always get it, but I strive for that, and I admire it a lot in other artists' work as well. So I use color and light to advantage in my work in a number of different ways. One is just, what we're covering on this video is understanding it and predicting it and looking for it. When you know that something is going to happen, or you can anticipate where the sun is going to be and how it might be affecting the landscape, you can plan for it and look for it. So I try to use that to my advantage. And then in the paint itself, I've noticed that people and collectors respond to those dramatic light effects. And while I love to paint muted and gray paintings or rainy day paintings too, which I guess is using light, just in a different way, in a different sort of counterintuitive way. It's sort of the absence of light. I enjoy knowing about it and using it and implementing it in my painting, and sort of being the boss of my painting instead of it bossing me around and telling me what to paint. Being in control or understanding it a little more gives me more choices in my approach. So I think my work may be somewhat recognizable for its use of color, for some bright and sometimes saturated use of color. Though I have to say that I feel like my approach to painting is based on what the scene is sort of telling me to do. So there are times where I might have a very muted or controlled color palette, and times, particularly when I'm painting out in California, I tend to paint more saturated. I think that's because of the views that I'm seeing, as well as the influence of other artist friends that tend to paint very saturated. I don't like to restrict myself really to a certain voice. Maybe that's a detriment, maybe not. I want to be able to experiment and play and let sort of what I'm painting dictate how I might approach it. So I hope that while sometimes my work is very recognizable, that sometimes you're also a little surprised that I did or painted a certain thing in a certain way. I have always loved art. I'm sure this is really not a unique statement to many of you. Art and painting and drawing, I think, are part of my DNA. They are who I am at my root. I have a memory from second grade of carving a brown crayon into little feathers and gluing it onto this coloring page of an owl, and I'm sure my teacher rolled her eyes and thought, Susie's making this gigantic mess, but I've been making messes my whole life. And I had a great art teacher, Ken Tracy, in high school. He made a 4th year of art just for me. And in college, is when the first time I painted with oils. Had a marvelous professor who I still am Facebook friends with, Peter Jones, and he taught us how to paint and draw representationally. I got great teaching in figure painting, figure drawing, color theory, still life, plein air, although we called it outdoor painting at the time, all through college, and didn't know that was a unique art education until I started painting in plein air events and meeting peers who had gone off to college hoping that they would get training in representational painting and didn't get that. And I'm not saying that abstract or expressionism is wrong. I don't think that one has to be wrong for another to be right. But it's certainly what I wanted and what I got, and I owe a lot to my high school and college professors for purposing that their programs and their students would get strong underpinnings in representational work. I graduated from Louisiana Tech University. My degree is in advertising and fine arts. Grew up with not a whole lot of money, and so it didn't cross my mind to simply be a studio major, probably because of buying into the fallacy of the starving artist. But I felt like an understandable path into using art in a career was to be a graphic designer, which I was. I was a graphic designer, then an art director in ad agencies before having children, and then I had kids, and then began to pick up design clients, and I always painted on the side. Maybe I did advertising art, but then in 2008, my husband's job took us to the Middle East, and that for me was a reset button in my life. I went from doing advertising art to doing art and as little advertising as possible. Now I have one client that I still do some work for, and I advertise for myself. And when we lived in the Middle East, I got into a community of other artists. We, 4 of us women, traveled together. This is before I knew plein air events existed, but I would travel with other women artists, and we would share accommodations and groceries and taxis or rental cars, and we would just paint in India or in Paris or in, Laguna Beach, and I would just travel and paint. And so I've always loved it, always kept it up, and I just feel fabulously fortunate that this is what I get to do with my life. Like many of you, it feels like a motor on the inside. It's part of who God created me to be. I, again, feel so blessed that this is what I get to do as my life. I was, one morning, was driving early to meet some students for a workshop that I was teaching with the Chestnut Group, and I was driving out to Leaper's Fork, which is actually a view from this workshop is what I'm going to be painting today for the demo. And it was so beautiful, just beautiful morning light. The mist was sort of lifting and rolling off of the green hills around me, and I just felt profound gratitude that I get to be an artist, vocationally, and more than vocationally, just sort of who you are, part and parcel to who I am on the inside. And not only that, but I get to kind of share some of the things that I've learned along the way with students, because I know the power that it has in my life, and I know that drive and intensity that so many artists feel, and to be able to sort of help them along their path to paint better and to find their next step is very gratifying. And then what else inspires me to paint is these plein air events all around the country. I am a studio painter too. I do portrait figure, I do still life. But these awesome opportunities to go all around the United States and paint places that people are familiar with, it's really a great honor, and I think it's a placement for an artist in the United States that we're, as plein air painters, we're in a position to sometimes be people's introduction to art. They get to know the artist, they get to know the painting, they get to see it happen, and they have a personal connection with a piece of artwork that is fun for them as a collector, especially maybe even a first-time collector. And then as a plein air painter, you get to have a relationship with your collector that I think is really unique and awesome. So what subject am I known for? I actually hope that I'm not known for any particular subject. I think I've painted crawfish before. Maybe that's not something that many people paint. I'm from Louisiana, and I paint crawfish and they kind of disappear like soap bubbles, and I think that's because of people's connection with the South and Louisiana and the culture, and it's unique. But I paint still life, I paint landscape, I paint portrait figure. I think I'm probably a little more known for my plein air work because that gets me around the country and gets me introduced to people. But I also have favorite models that I work with and paint in portrait figure groups. So I'm not in a big rush to sort of, other than strictly painting representationally at this point in my career, I'm not in a big rush to sort of limit what the subject matter is that I paint. And as an aside here, just the importance of knowing how to draw and having strong foundations in drawing that I was really fortunate to get with my high school art teacher and with my Drawing 101 courses in college. Because when you know how to draw and you have some strategies and techniques for recording what you see in the three-dimensional and getting it into the two-dimensional, means that you're less likely to sort of limit what it is that you're painting. So, more things are available, so why not? Why not paint them? I chose to primarily be an oil painter because, I have to give the credit to my college professor, Peter Jones, who, we took oil painting classes, and to go from having strictly used water-based medium like watercolor or acrylic in high school and to the freedom of expression that I am able to get with oil, it was a revelation, to me. In particular, I remember one exercise that he had us do in class that was a spiritual marker in my artistic journey. So, he took a group of students. We had color theory, we had drawing, we had basic oil painting, where we started with grisaille, we started with learning some old master techniques. But on this particular day, it was towards the end of the quarter, Peter set up 2 still lifes of just flowers that he had cut from his garden in simple glass vases. And we had 30 minutes, start to finish, to paint the painting. So, you take deep breaths, you prepare yourself, you've got a clean palette with all your paint squeezed out, and he started the timer. And what happened to me, as best as I can explain it in that particular exercise, was that sort of left brain overthinking part of my brain ran off, and my right brain just observed and recorded and observed and recorded and reserved and recorded the color and the shape, and thinking less about flower and glass and vase and more about this value of color in this particular place. And at the end of the 30 minutes, it was just a revelation. I stepped back and I looked, and to date it was probably the favorite painting I had painted in my life as a 19-year-old in college. And I think that one exercise that he did in the manner of Manet, that Manet did at the end of his life, still informs the way I see and approach painting now, whether it is flowers in a glass vase or the model or the landscape. It's certainly not the only way to paint. There's a lot to be said for being slow and getting your drawing accurate and thinking through a composition. But that sort of responsive nature to painting, and how oil, back to the point of why I love to paint in oil, that sort of, the way oil allows me to shift things around and move and edit, I love it. I love the freedom and the expression that I get with oil. So there are some, I would say, times in my painting progression where things changed, probably not dramatically, but steadily, progressively. And of course, college, when you're learning the foundations and then building on those foundations. But then I would say, moving to the Middle East and making it a priority and a focus, that ability to sort of set down everything that you had agreed to and picked up in your life, setting it down, and then only picking up the things that are of most importance. My family relationships and my relationships with my spiritual life and my relationships with my children and my art. It was an opportunity to simplify. Full confession, I have not cleaned a toilet since 2008. I realized that I could free up my time by changing some priorities. And while I still like to have a clean house, I also like to pay other people to do that. And so freeing up time so that I'm doing less of things that are less important to me and more of things that are more important to me, I would say it was a big shift in my painting. Getting together on a regular basis with art groups and painting. When I got back to the United States in 2010, I was fortunate to be involved in a very active art league, the Woodlands Art League, where a minimum of 3 times a week, I could get together and paint from life with the model. Things like that, you just get better and better and better. You can't help but get better because it's that 10,000 hour rule, of sustained and disciplined effort and study makes you better. And then the other things that I think made big differences in my painting was choosing and studying with some really great artists. Rob Liberace, Clayton Beck, Judy Carducci, Dan Gerhardt's, Jill Carver, Michael Lynch. These are all people, Jeffrey Hine, these are all people that I've taken workshops with. There are other people that I look at their schedule and look at my schedule and think, when can I study with them? Because there's something that they have in their work that I want to incorporate into my work. And so that taking of workshops has made a big difference in my progression, and I hope in your progression too. And then just doing, and I would say getting involved in plein air events. You know, my first plein air event was it felt like a trial by fire. You know, I had a lot of experience painting outdoors, but painting competitively, one of my first plein air events was painting with Laguna Plein Air Invitational, which that's a story how I got invited to participate in that. Thank you, Rosemary and Lynn Vale, for believing in me. But my goal was show up with paintings that show why I deserve to be here. But it felt like being an Olympic walk-on, you know, like, yeah, I'm supposed to be here. But really, I had a lot of trepidation. But I would say participating in plein air events, painting all week in a competitive, somewhat competitive environment, certainly not cutthroat, but then walking in and seeing what your peers have done with the same raw material, the same location, you know, their abilities plus their medium and what they came in with. Every time I walk into a competition with my paintings under my arm to turn them in, it feels like a master class in how Ray Roberts or Colin Page or Amy Erickson or Chong Wang, you know, how they handled composition. And maybe a little unfair to people that are just getting into it, that we professionals get to learn from each other. But it's certainly been a great opportunity and steps in my progression. So we sharpen each other, I think. So, okay, so I think there are reasons that people choose to paint. And I think most of them are internal reasons. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, feeling like it is part of your DNA, part of your makeup. And I know that painting can be a profoundly frustrating experience, especially when you're just getting started, because you have this drive to do it. But until that sort of toolkit or backpack of knowledge that is just sort of with you, the way typing is sort of second nature to you, it can, you know, you can get out with high hopes and go to bed with abject depression. But there's something that's in us that gets us up the next morning and you're just, what am I going to paint now? And I think more than talent, that passion and drive is what motivates us to show up at our easel and to take more of the abuse until we get one that's a keeper, you know? And there's something that's so great about that. And it doesn't matter that your keeper from 5 years ago is something that you might want to put in the bin this year. It is part of your story and part of your history. And I will say, though, that so many people have sort of had a career where they have been great videographers, or they've been great lawyers or teachers, and now they've retired and they finally want to return to painting. And there is such an anxiety to get going and to get started that sometimes they put the cart before the horse. You know, that it is, I think, always a good idea to start with drawing, start with some color theory, assign yourself some of the sort of grub work of doing your color charts that Richard Schmidt outlines so well in his book, Alla Prima and Alla Prima 2. do some of the things that the student, that are characteristics of the student, and then take the workshop with the instructor that you admire. And also just allow yourself to have bad paintings, to learn and to play. They don't all have to be masterpieces, and then in the end I think you'll be a better painter as a result. Along the lines of gratitude and life in general, I have been thinking a lot lately about just having an attitude of gratitude in life. And I watched a BBC documentary on the Bronte sisters. So here are three women that lived 160 years ago, and in the course of history is not that long ago. And they had to write as men with pseudonyms, and they all died. The one that lived the longest, by the time she was my age, had been dead 9 years. And I look at that and I think, here I am, a woman. I can travel all over the country independently with the aid of Google, and show up and paint as an artist, with my own name, with male peers, with the full support and excitement of my husband. And I think, of all the people that have been alive in the history of ever, I think I may be one of the most blessed. And so when I start getting whiny and moody, I just think that I have it pretty good. And I also, in taking that into account, like to serve other people. And I serve on the board with Oil Painters of America. And even just in doing this video and imparting some things that I've learned, I hope that you are able to move forward on your path and to feel gratitude that you have the ability to paint in your life. Okay, and then lastly, just on the profession of being an artist and how you get into that, or you move into being a professional artist. I would love to share some advice that I got handed to me by a mentor, Rich Nelson, who in turn received it from Bart Lindstrom, who was a mentor of his. And Bart said, making it in this business is a two-step process. Step one is to get good. Step two is to get out there. And the better you are at step one, the better step two goes. And I think that is such great advice. And I would almost make it circular in that the better you are at the getting out there, then the more opportunities you have to get good. Similar to doing the plein air events makes me a stronger artist. So get good and get out there, and good luck.
Well, that is Suzie Baker. What an inspiration she is. The video is called Color Magic for Stronger Paintings. You can learn more about the full-length video at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code in the comments section for you today only. Also, what else do we have for you? Well, we have a free video. It's 2 hours in length, $100 value, and you can get it. It's called 97 Amazing Painting Secrets from the World's Best Artists. Lots and lots of painting secrets and tips. And you can find it for free at 97tips.com. Hey, thanks for watching. See you tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'm Eric Rhodes.
There is nothing quite as satisfying as when you make the last stroke on your painting, step back, and know that you've nailed it. You've created a work of art that is exactly what you envisioned. Each element in the painting, color harmony, the feel of light, all of it working together to create the right rhythm, leading your eyes along a natural path. You're about to discover how you can get to your aha faster. Mastering color and light is what makes a painting great. Get these techniques right, and you'll never shy away from painting anything again. In this new and exclusive workshop-style video, highly sought-after instructor and award-winning artist Suzie Baker shows you exactly what you need to know to create the most beautiful, realistic color and light in your paintings. By adding Suzie Baker's Color Magic to your resource library, you get to experience Suzie's easygoing and informative teaching style all to yourself. It's like having a one-on-one class with Suzie. And the best part? You get to do this on your own schedule and in your own home or studio.
Here are some things that I hope you get from this video. I've put a lot of thought into what are some of those basic fund of knowledge that I got in college and through years of painting and experience that I could sort of impart to you so that your next plein air experience is more rewarding. You can take some of this color knowledge and bring that into your sensibility and your work.
From the first minute of this value-packed video, you'll find out that color and light act in a very predictable way. How to mix just the right colors to get exactly what you want, and how different light sources affect shadows and color. By the time you watch the entire video, you'll be looking at the world so much differently than you do now. You'll be seeing the true colors of the world. Don't start another painting before you soak in the valuable tips and techniques that Suzie lays out for you in the Color Magic. Watch and you'll not only be inspired, you'll be making better paintings. Color Magic, available on both DVD and digital download. This is one video you do not want to miss out on. Order yours today.